June 19, 1944. In the vast waters of the Philippine Sea, an American submarine lay silently beneath the surface, directly in the path of the most powerful fleet Japan had assembled since Pearl Harbor. And within hours, one of the Imperial Navy's greatest aircraft carriers would be torn apart by torpedoes fired from the depths. What unfolded that day was not an accident of war. It was the result of years of brutal Pacific fighting, technological evolution, intelligence breakthroughs, and the steady, relentless pressure applied by American submarines against Japan's maritime empire. The sinking of the aircraft carrier Shokaku was not just another ship loss. It marked a turning point in the destruction of Japan's naval air power. To understand the significance of that moment, we must first understand the target. Shokaku was not an ordinary carrier. Commissioned in 1941, she was one of the most modern and capable fleet carriers in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Alongside her sister ship Zuikaku, she had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Her aircraft struck American battleships and airfields, helping to launch Japan's rapid expansion across the Pacific. Shokaku later fought in the Battle of the Coral Sea, where she was damaged but survived, and she played roles in major carrier battles, including Santa Cruz. By 1944, she remained one of Japan's most valuable capital ships, a symbol of its once dominant carrier force. But by mid-1944, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The United States had rebuilt its fleet after Pearl Harbor and was now on the offensive. The Mariana Islands became the next objective in America's island-hopping campaign. Their capture would place U.S. bombers within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. The Japanese response was Operation A-Go, a decisive fleet engagement designed to destroy the advancing American invasion force. The result would become known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea, one of the largest carrier battles in history. Enter USS Cavalla, SS-244. Cavalla was a Gato-class submarine commissioned in early 1944. Built for long-range Pacific patrols, she was designed to operate independently, striking at enemy shipping lanes and warships alike. Under the command of Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler, Cavalla embarked on her first war patrol in May 1944. Kossler was experienced, disciplined, and aggressive, traits essential for submarine command. American submarines had already proven devastating against Japanese merchant shipping, strangling supply lines. But attacking major warships, especially carriers surrounded by destroyers and aircraft patrols, required extraordinary skill and patience. On June 19, 1944, Cavalla found herself in the right place at the most critical moment. American intelligence, including radio intercepts and code breaking, predicted Japanese fleet movements. Submarines were positioned as pickets along likely approach routes. Cavalla was one of them. That morning, lookouts aboard Cavalla spotted masts on the horizon, multiple large warships. Periscope observations confirmed the unbelievable. A full Japanese carrier task force was approaching. Among them was Shokaku. For a submarine commander, this was both a dream and a nightmare. The opportunity to strike a fleet carrier was rare, but carriers traveled with heavy escort, destroyers scanning for submarines, zigzagging unpredictably, ready to drop depth charges at the slightest hint of danger. Cavalla maneuvered carefully. Cavalla submerged and began positioning for an attack. Every movement had to be calculated: speed, angle, distance, target course. A submarine's advantage was stealth, but firing torpedoes would reveal her presence instantly. As Cavalla closed in, Japanese aircraft were launching from Shokaku's deck to attack American carriers. The skies above were filling with planes in what would soon be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American naval aviators shot down Japanese aircraft in staggering numbers. Below the surface, Cavalla prepared to strike. Kossler tracked Shokaku through the periscope. The large silhouette was unmistakable. Timing was everything. He needed to fire from optimal range and angle to ensure hits before escorts could interfere. At the decisive moment, Cavalla launched a spread of 6 torpedoes. Seconds passed that must have felt like eternity. Then, explosions. Multiple torpedoes slammed into Shokaku's hull. Eyewitnesses aboard the carrier later described violent blasts that tore open aviation fuel lines and ignited catastrophic fires. One torpedo detonated near forward aviation fuel storage, triggering secondary explosions. Flames spread rapidly through hangar decks filled with fueled and armed aircraft. Cavalla immediately went deep. The escorts reacted instantly. Destroyers raced toward the torpedo tracks, sonar searching for the attacker. Depth charges began exploding around Cavalla, shaking her hull violently. Inside the submarine, lights flickered, equipment rattled. Men braced themselves as concussions echoed through steel compartments. For hours, Cavalla endured relentless counterattack. Depth charges detonated above and around her, forcing Cavalla to maneuver silently and avoid detection. The crew maintained discipline under crushing pressure. Any mistake could mean destruction. Meanwhile, on the surface, Shokaku's fate was sealed. Fires raged uncontrollably. Damage control teams struggled, but aviation fuel vapors ignited in massive internal explosions. Eventually, a tremendous blast tore through the carrier, and she began to sink. Of her crew of over 1,600 men, more than 1,200 perished. By day's end, one of Japan's most experienced fleet carriers was gone. Cavalla survived the depth charge assault and slipped away. The destruction of Shokaku was more than a tactical victory. It permanently reduced Japan's ability to wage carrier warfare. Combined with the catastrophic aircraft losses of the Philippine Sea, it marked the effective end of Japan's carrier offensive capability. But this mission, from detection to torpedo impact to survival beneath depth charges, deserves a deeper examination. The moment the last torpedo left the tubes of USS Cavalla, SS-244, Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler knew the easy part was over. Firing a spread of torpedoes at a fleet carrier was a bold act. Surviving the retaliation was something else entirely. Beneath the surface of the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, Cavalla had just revealed her presence to one of the most heavily guarded formations in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Above her, destroyers were already accelerating toward the torpedo tracks, their sonar operators straining to detect the faintest echo of the submarine that had just struck a mortal blow against Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku. To understand how Cavalla achieved this success, we must examine the mechanics of submarine warfare in 1944. By this stage of World War II, American submarines had corrected many of the torpedo reliability problems that plagued them earlier in the war. Faulty detonators and depth control errors had once caused torpedoes to pass harmlessly beneath targets or fail to explode. After extensive investigation and redesign, the Mark 14 torpedo and its exploder mechanisms had been improved significantly. Cavalla's torpedoes on this patrol were far more dependable than those used in 1942. When Kossler fired his 6-torpedo spread, he did so with confidence that if they hit, they would detonate properly. Positioning for the attack required precision. Cavalla had first sighted elements of Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet earlier that day.
Rather than rushing into a reckless approach, Kossler maneuvered to gain a favorable firing angle. Submarine doctrine emphasized attacking from ahead of the target's track whenever possible. This allowed the submarine to fire a spread across the path of the moving ship, increasing the likelihood of multiple hits. It also reduced the time torpedoes needed to travel, limiting opportunities for the target to evade. Shokaku was zigzagging, standard anti-submarine procedure, but fleet carriers were massive vessels, over 800 feet long. Their size made them easier to track visually through a periscope. However, they were rarely alone. Destroyers screened the formation, scanning with sonar and prepared to charge at suspicious contacts. Aircraft from the carrier could also patrol the sea surface, spotting periscope wakes or oil slicks. Kossler chose to close the range aggressively. Reports suggest he fired from approximately 1,200 yards, close enough to ensure accuracy, but dangerously near the enemy screen. At that range, the torpedoes would reach their target in roughly a minute. There would be no long wait for impact, but there would also be almost no time to evade once the enemy realized what had happened. When at least 3 torpedoes struck Shokaku, the results were catastrophic. The explosions ruptured aviation gasoline storage and ignited volatile vapors throughout the hangar decks. Japanese carriers carried large quantities of fuel and munitions for air operations. If damage control failed to isolate fires quickly, chain reactions could occur. That is exactly what happened. Survivors later described enormous internal blasts that shook the ship from bow to stern. But below the surface, Cavalla was already fighting for survival. Immediately after firing, Kossler ordered a hard dive. Cavalla descended rapidly to greater depth, rigging for silent running. This meant shutting down non-essential machinery, minimizing noise, and reducing speed to avoid sonar detection. Inside the submarine, the atmosphere grew tense and claustrophobic. Men whispered. Gauges were monitored constantly. Every creak of the hull sounded amplified in the silence. The first depth charges exploded not long after. Japanese destroyers following torpedo wakes back to their origin dropped patterns of depth charges set to detonate at varying depths. These weapons did not need a direct hit. Their concussive force could crush hull plating or damage internal systems. Cavalla shook violently as explosions erupted nearby. Dust fell from overhead piping. Instruments rattled. Some crewmen were thrown against bulkheads. Depth charge attacks were psychological warfare as much as physical assault. The waiting between detonations was often worse than the blasts themselves. Submariners had no visual sense of what was happening outside. They could only listen as sonar pings echoed and charges detonated. Kossler ordered evasive maneuvers, changing course and depth unpredictably. The goal was to break sonar contact and create uncertainty for the attackers. Cavalla descended to around 300 feet, deeper than many early war submarines dared to operate. Gato-class boats were built tough, but diving deep always carried risk. Hull integrity was everything. For hours, the Japanese escorts continued their hunt. Over 100 depth charges were reportedly dropped in the attempt to destroy Cavalla. Some exploded close enough to cause minor damage. Light fixtures shattered. A few leaks developed, though none were catastrophic. The crew remained disciplined, performing damage control in near darkness. Above, Shokaku's struggle was ending. As fires raged out of control, the carrier suffered a massive internal explosion, believed to have been triggered by ignited fuel vapors. The blast tore apart much of the vessel's internal structure. Eventually, the order to abandon ship was given. At approximately mid-afternoon on June 19, 1944, Shokaku rolled and sank, taking over 1,200 sailors with her. It was one of the worst single-ship losses for Japan in the war. Cavalla would not learn the full extent of the damage immediately. Submarines rarely remained near a target long enough to observe final results after a major attack, especially against a heavily escorted fleet. Survival came first. By nightfall, the intensity of the depth charging diminished. Kossler cautiously brought Cavalla to periscope depth to assess the situation. The horizon was clear. The Japanese fleet had moved on. Cavalla had survived one of the most dangerous retaliation efforts of the Pacific War. Strategically, the sinking of Shokaku had profound consequences. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was already turning disastrous for Japan. American carrier aircraft were decimating Japanese air groups in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The loss of Shokaku further reduced Japan's carrier strength at a critical moment. Combined with the sinking of the carrier Taiho by another U.S. submarine, the Imperial Navy lost two major fleet carriers in a single day, both to submarines. Submarine warfare had matured by 1944 into a decisive strategic weapon. American boats not only strangled merchant shipping, but also threatened capital ships, once considered nearly invulnerable. The ability of a single submerged vessel to cripple a fleet carrier demonstrated the changing nature of naval power. For Cavalla and her crew, the patrol was already historic, and it was only her first. The submarine would go on to complete multiple war patrols, earning commendations and battle stars. Commander Kossler would receive the Navy Cross for his leadership during the attack. Yet beyond medals and statistics, the human story remains central. Inside Cavalla during those hours of depth charging were young men who understood that one structural failure, one lucky sonar fix, or one perfectly placed depth charge could end their lives instantly. They endured not because of luck alone, but because of training, leadership, and composure under extreme pressure. The sinking of Shokaku symbolized more than the destruction of steel and aircraft. It marked the fading of Japan's early war naval dominance and the rising effectiveness of American combined arms, submarines, carriers, intelligence, and industrial power working together. But the larger battle of the Philippine Sea was still unfolding.
As the sun rose over the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, the scale of the battle above and below the waves became apparent. While USS Cavalla, SS-244, had struck Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku from beneath the waves, the skies were alive with aircraft from both the U.S. and Japanese fleets, each side seeking to assert control over the Marianas. The Battle of the Philippine Sea would go down in history as the largest carrier battle of World War II, and its intensity was magnified by the precision and lethality of submarine warfare. Cavalla's strike on Shokaku was only one part of a larger tapestry of destruction, but its strategic impact was profound. Above the surface, American carriers launched waves of fighters and dive bombers to intercept the approaching Japanese planes. Pilots from USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and other carriers had been alerted to the enemy's approach through intelligence and reconnaissance. The Imperial Japanese Navy had committed nearly 450 carrier-based aircraft in a desperate bid to repel the American invasion of Saipan and the Mariana Islands. The result was an unprecedented aerial engagement, later nicknamed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, due to the overwhelming losses suffered by the Japanese air forces. From beneath the surface, Cavalla's crew could only listen to the distant thrum of the air battle, punctuated by the muffled concussions of distant artillery. The submarine remained submerged, calculating its next moves while evading Japanese escorts.
The stealthy strike had forced the enemy into defensive maneuvers, but Cavalla still faced danger from destroyers, patrol aircraft, and the possibility of retaliatory submarine attacks. Kossler's decisions in these critical hours illustrated the art of submarine command, balancing aggression with survival, patience with initiative. The destruction of Shokaku had immediate operational consequences. The carrier had been one of Japan's most experienced and capable platforms for projecting air power. Her aircraft were among the best trained in the Imperial Navy, with many veteran pilots who had survived early Pacific campaigns. With Shokaku gone, Japan's ability to conduct coordinated carrier strikes was severely diminished. Remaining carriers struggled to fill the gap, often sending inexperienced pilots into battle with limited training and insufficient coordination. This drastically reduced the effectiveness of subsequent Japanese operations in the Marianas. Cavalla's actions also demonstrated the synergy between intelligence and tactical execution. U.S. Navy codebreakers had successfully intercepted and decoded Japanese communications, revealing the approximate positions of fleet movements. Submarines like Cavalla were strategically placed based on this intelligence, creating a lethal web of underwater ambush points. This integration of intelligence, submarine warfare, and carrier operations reflected the increasing sophistication of U.S. naval strategy in 1944. Submarines were no longer isolated hunters. They were coordinated instruments of a broader operational plan designed to weaken Japan's strategic assets before decisive surface engagements. While Cavalla maneuvered, the Japanese fleet struggled to adapt. Escorts attempted to detect and neutralize the submarine threat, while pilots launched attacks against American positions. Japanese carriers were increasingly vulnerable to coordinated strikes from both submarines and air power. The psychological impact of submarine attacks on Japanese sailors was profound. Reports from survivors describe the constant tension of sonar sweeps and depth-charge detonations, the terrifying unpredictability of underwater predators that could strike with lethal precision and vanish. Cavalla's successful attack on Shokaku intensified this fear and forced the Japanese to reevaluate fleet protection strategies in a theater already dominated by American technological and tactical superiority. The broader context of the Battle of the Philippine Sea further highlights the significance of Cavalla's patrol. As American carrier-based aircraft engaged Japanese planes, the battle demonstrated the shifting balance of naval power. U.S. forces had embraced radar-guided fighter direction, enabling better interception and coordination. Aircraft losses on the American side were minimal compared to the devastating attrition suffered by Japan. The destruction of Shokaku and other carriers left Japan unable to replace experienced pilots and aircraft quickly enough, creating a cascading effect on morale, operational capacity, and strategic flexibility. Kossler and Cavalla had also faced the perils inherent in torpedo combat against heavily escorted targets. The submarine's success required meticulous attention to detail, careful observation of target course and speed, precise calculation of torpedo gyro angles, and impeccable timing. Any miscalculation could have resulted in a missed opportunity or catastrophic exposure to enemy counterattack. The success of the torpedo spread that struck Shokaku was a testament to both the rigorous training of American submariners and the meticulous leadership of Kossler under extreme pressure. The human dimension of the mission is equally compelling. Cavalla's crew, like other submariners, lived and operated in confined spaces for weeks at a time, enduring high humidity, heat, and the psychological strain of constant danger. Each action required coordination and trust. The lives of hundreds depended on the decisions made by the commanding officer and the execution of orders by individual crew members. During the attack on Shokaku, every member of the crew played a role, from torpedo room operators to sonar technicians, in creating the conditions that made the strike successful and ensuring the submarine's survival against a determined and sophisticated enemy. The strategic implications of Cavalla's success reverberated throughout the Pacific theater. With Shokaku removed from the equation, the Japanese Naval Command faced a reduced capacity for carrier-based operations. This weakened their ability to contest the American advance in the Marianas, enabling U.S. forces to achieve air superiority and facilitate amphibious landings on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The loss of experienced pilots and carriers accelerated the decline of Japanese naval aviation, limiting future offensive operations and contributing to the overall momentum of Allied forces in the Pacific. Moreover, Cavalla's patrol exemplified the evolution of submarine warfare during World War II. Early in the conflict, American submarines had struggled with mechanical failures, inexperienced crews, and unreliable torpedoes. By 1944, lessons learned from previous patrols had transformed American submarines into highly effective instruments of war. Tactical doctrine emphasized stealth, patience, and coordinated action with other naval assets. Submarines became force multipliers, capable of influencing large-scale fleet engagements by removing high-value targets such as carrier kings from the equation. The aftermath of the attack on Shokaku also illustrates the interplay between technology and human skill. Advanced sonar, reliable torpedoes, and accurate periscope targeting allowed a single submarine to strike with devastating effect. Yet technology alone was insufficient. Leadership, judgment under pressure, and the disciplined execution of complex procedures determined success or failure. Cavalla's patrol is a testament to the combination of innovation, training, and bravery that defined U.S. submarine operations in the latter half of World War II. As the battle unfolded across the Philippine Sea, Cavalla's crew could only anticipate the broader consequences of their actions. While they had successfully sunk Shokaku and survived depth charge retaliation, the larger engagement continued, with massive carrier-air battles shaping the strategic trajectory of the war. For the men aboard the submarine, their contribution was one of many interlocking components that ultimately led to American dominance in the Pacific and the eventual liberation of the Marianas.
Life aboard USS Cavalla, SS-244, during her patrol in the Philippine Sea was a study in tension, endurance, and teamwork. Unlike the surface ships and carriers engaged in the dramatic aerial dogfights above, Cavalla's war unfolded in near silence, beneath the waves, where the slightest noise could betray her position and mean instant destruction. The attack on Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku was the pinnacle of this underwater struggle, but the human element behind the torpedo spread, depth charge evasions, and strategic positioning was as critical as any technological advantage. Submarine duty in World War II was notorious for its psychological and physical challenges. The Gato-class boats, like Cavalla, were built for endurance, but space was cramped. Sailors worked in shifts, sleeping in tight bunks called rack beds, stacked 3 high, often next to engines or battery compartments that radiated heat. The air could become stifling, especially after long dives. Humidity, diesel fumes, and the lack of fresh air created a near constant state of discomfort. Yet in the midst of this, discipline and focus were essential. A single lapse in procedure could lead to catastrophe. A depth charge in the wrong place, a miscalculated course, or a delay in firing torpedoes could end the mission or lives instantly. For Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler, leadership required constant vigilance. Every sonar blip, every distant ship silhouette, every subtle movement in the water had to be interpreted correctly. In the hours leading up to the strike on Shokaku, he relied on the expertise of his crew to provide accurate readings on speed, heading, and distance. Torpedo calculations depended on precise data.
Misjudging even a few degrees could send torpedoes harmlessly past the target or directly into danger zones where destroyers awaited. The crew's cohesion was tested when Cavalla initiated the attack. Each member had a clearly defined role. The torpedo officer timed and released the spread, the sonar technicians tracked enemy movements and potential threats, the helmsman adjusted depth and heading, and the engine room managed the precise speed necessary for stealth. Outside the submarine, Shokaku's massive silhouette presented a fleeting target. Inside, every second of delay carried immense consequences. The tension was palpable. Every heartbeat felt magnified in the enclosed steel vessel. Once the torpedoes struck, the underwater world became a theater of survival. The Japanese destroyers reacted immediately, launching depth charges in relentless patterns. Cavalla shuddered as explosions reverberated through the hull. Instruments rattled, lights flickered, and water sometimes seeped into compartments from minor leaks. The crew, trained rigorously for this scenario, executed silent running procedures. Engines were slowed or shut down, noise minimized, and communication reduced to whispers or hand signals. The fear of being crushed by an explosive blast or imploding from exceeding crush depth was constant. The depth charge attacks lasted hours. Crew members reported feeling as though the submarine itself was being squeezed by the water, a rolling, suffocating pressure compounded by the concussions from nearby detonations. Yet, despite the psychological and physical strain, the Cavalla crew maintained focus, understanding that panicking would only hasten disaster. Leadership and trust were paramount. Kossler's decisions, whether to ascend to periscope depth briefly, alter course, or dive deeper, had to be executed flawlessly and without hesitation. Beyond the immediate danger, long-term stressors weighed heavily. Submarine patrols could last weeks, isolated from the world with limited food supplies, fresh water, and medical resources. Sailors endured these conditions in rotations, adapting to the monotony, cramped living spaces, and constant vigilance. The attack on Shokaku was a moment of extreme action in an environment characterized by prolonged tension. When the torpedoes hit, the relief was immediate, but tempered by the understanding that retaliation could still destroy them at any moment. The successful sinking of Shokaku also highlighted the courage and ingenuity of the crew in tactical terms. Submarines were vulnerable, slow to maneuver compared to surface warships, and completely dependent on stealth for survival. Cavalla's ability to penetrate a heavily escorted formation, fire an effective torpedo spread, and evade counterattack required not only bravery, but expert execution of naval doctrine. Every man aboard contributed to the mission's success, from precise torpedo loading in the forward tubes to maintaining silence in the engine room. In addition to technical skill, camaraderie and morale played a crucial role. Submariners developed deep bonds under these conditions. Each sailor's safety depended on every other crew member performing perfectly. The attack on Shokaku and the subsequent depth charge ordeal strengthened these bonds. Stories from survivors describe a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and quiet pride as they realized they had successfully struck a major enemy capital ship and survived one of the war's most dangerous counterattacks. The attack also illustrated the evolution of tactical coordination between submarines and broader naval operations. Cavalla's position had been determined in advance based on intelligence from code breakers, aerial reconnaissance, and fleet reports. Submarines were no longer solitary hunters, but integral components of a coordinated strategy designed to isolate, damage, and destroy critical enemy assets. Kossler's decision-making exemplified the skillful application of doctrine within the chaotic, high-stakes environment of the Philippine Sea. Success was not merely a matter of chance. It was the result of meticulous planning, leadership, and teamwork. Finally, the sinking of Shokaku had an enduring psychological effect on both sides.
For Japanese sailors, it was a sobering reminder of the vulnerability of even their most formidable ships. For Americans, it reinforced the effectiveness of submarine warfare as a strategic tool capable of reshaping battles and campaigns. The event demonstrated that courage, skill, and teamwork under pressure could achieve results far beyond what raw firepower might suggest. In Part 5, we will explore the broader implications of Cavalla's mission, how the loss of Shokaku affected Japanese naval strategy, how American submarines continued to dominate the Pacific, and the lessons learned that shaped subsequent submarine operations and the ultimate outcome of the Pacific War.
The sinking of Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku by USS Cavalla, SS-244, had consequences far beyond a single tactical victory. By June 19, 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier strength had already been stretched thin, but losing Shokaku dealt a strategic blow that reverberated through the remainder of the Pacific War. The event underscored how submarine operations had matured from isolated patrols to decisive instruments of fleet warfare, capable of shaping the outcome of massive engagements such as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Shokaku had been more than a ship. She was a repository of experience, skill, and air power. Her flight decks and hangars were home to veteran pilots who had survived multiple campaigns, from Pearl Harbor to Coral Sea and beyond. These men were experts in night operations, dive bombing, and fighter coordination. The sudden loss of both the ship and a large portion of its trained aircrew dramatically reduced the Japanese Navy's ability to challenge U.S. carrier groups in the Marianas and beyond. The psychological blow was equally significant, shaking confidence among Japanese commanders and crews. From the American perspective, the effectiveness of submarine operations had become a force multiplier. The U.S. Navy had invested heavily in developing advanced sonar, radar, torpedo technology, and training programs that allowed submarines to strike capital ships with precision. Cavalla's success was emblematic of this evolution. Submarines had moved from a supporting role targeting supply and transport vessels to being capable of neutralizing the enemy's core fighting assets. The strategic ramifications were clear. By removing Shokaku and other carriers, American submarines helped ensure air superiority for fleet operations and amphibious assaults. The Battle of the Philippine Sea itself became a turning point, largely because of these cumulative effects. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, in which Japanese aircraft were decimated by U.S. fighters, highlighted the disparity in pilot training, tactical doctrine, and overall fleet readiness between the two sides. Cavalla's torpedo strike complemented these aerial victories by physically removing one of the carriers, further reducing Japan's capacity to project power. With fewer carriers to launch aircraft, the Japanese Navy could not replace the losses inflicted by American aviators, and the Marianas campaign advanced with relatively lower American casualties. Additionally, the loss of Shokaku forced Japanese naval strategists to reconsider their deployment and defensive strategies. The vulnerability of carriers to submarine attack became painfully evident, emphasizing the need for improved anti-submarine tactics, more effective screening destroyers, and enhanced coordination with air reconnaissance. However, by mid-1944, Japan lacked both the technological advantage and the industrial capacity to fully implement these measures. The combination of superior American intelligence, submarine effectiveness, and carrier air coordination created a gap that Japan could not bridge. Cavalla's patrol also exemplified the cumulative impact of disciplined training and leadership on submarine success. Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler's ability to interpret intelligence, maneuver stealthily, and execute a high-stakes torpedo attack reflected both personal skill and the Navy's emphasis on rigorous preparation. Every decision, when to fire, how deep to dive, which evasion maneuvers to employ, had been rehearsed in exercises and prior patrols. The crew's cohesion, trust in command, and technical expertise turned a dangerous mission into a decisive strike that contributed to the larger strategic victory in the Pacific.
Moreover, the operational lessons from Cavalla's engagement informed subsequent submarine doctrine. Naval planners recognized the value of coordinating submarine positions based on intelligence, maintaining contact with surface and air forces, and emphasizing patience and precision over reckless aggression. The successful sinking demonstrated that even the largest, most well-defended ships were vulnerable under the right conditions, encouraging further use of submarines as offensive instruments in combined operations. This tactical evolution accelerated the collapse of Japan's Pacific naval capabilities in the final year of the war. Cavalla herself continued to serve with distinction. After her historic patrol, she conducted additional missions against Japanese shipping and military targets, further showcasing the versatility and strategic significance of submarines. Her survival through multiple patrols, despite the constant threat of depth charges, aircraft, and surface warships, testified to both her design and the professionalism of her crew. Ships like Cavalla became emblematic of the unsung heroism of American submariners, whose contributions often went unnoticed in the shadow of carrier battles and aerial dogfights, but were no less decisive. The human cost of these operations cannot be overlooked. While Cavalla's crew survived, the men aboard Shokaku faced a catastrophic fate. Over 1,200 sailors and aviators were lost when the carrier sank, a reminder of the brutal reality of naval warfare. These losses highlight the stakes involved in each patrol, the courage required to operate under extreme conditions, and the thin line between victory and disaster in submarine warfare. Strategically, the sinking of Shokaku and other similar submarine victories accelerated the collapse of Japanese resistance in the Pacific. By removing seasoned carriers and experienced air crews, American submarines ensured that subsequent fleet actions, including the invasion of the Marianas and the Battle of Leyte Gulf, were increasingly one-sided. The psychological, operational, and material effects of submarine attacks amplified the impact of American carrier and amphibious operations, shortening the duration of the conflict and contributing to the eventual Allied victory in the Pacific. Cavalla's success also inspired further investment in submarine programs and technological innovation. Lessons learned from the attack regarding positioning, torpedo spread patterns, evasion techniques, and coordination with intelligence assets were applied across the submarine fleet. By the end of 1944, U.S. submarines had sunk hundreds of Japanese ships, including numerous high-value warships, crippling the Imperial Navy's ability to wage conventional naval warfare. In retrospect, the sinking of Shokaku by Cavalla illustrates the convergence of technology, strategy, leadership, and courage. It was not merely an isolated act of destruction, but a moment in which the meticulous application of intelligence, the precision of torpedo technology, the skill of a trained crew, and the bravery of a submarine commander coalesced to change the course of a campaign. For historians and naval enthusiasts alike, the episode underscores the transformative power of submarines in modern naval warfare and the decisive impact of small, well-led units in shaping the outcome of large-scale battles.
The story of USS Cavalla, SS-244, and her sinking of Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku stands as one of the most remarkable chapters in naval history. By the end of June 19, 1944, the Pacific War had seen a turning point. Japan's carrier strength had been critically weakened, the balance of naval aviation power had shifted, and the effectiveness of American submarine operations had been validated in dramatic fashion. But beyond the tactical and strategic implications lies the enduring legacy of the men aboard Cavalla. Their courage, discipline, and unyielding determination under the most extreme conditions of war. Cavalla's patrol highlighted the importance of preparation and adaptability. Submarine warfare was not a game of chance. It demanded meticulous planning, precise execution, and the ability to respond dynamically to rapidly changing circumstances.
Kossler and his officers relied on intelligence gathered through code breaking, aerial reconnaissance, and prior patrol reports to predict the movements of the Japanese fleet. This intelligence-driven approach allowed Cavalla to position herself optimally for the attack on Shokaku, demonstrating the strategic value of information in modern warfare. The human dimension of Cavalla's success is equally compelling. The crew endured weeks of confinement in tight quarters, the stifling heat of diesel engines, and the ever-present threat of detection and death. During the attack, they demonstrated extraordinary composure. As depth charges exploded around them, each sailor performed their assigned duties with precision, trusting in their training and leadership. Their actions exemplified the resilience and professionalism that defined American submariners in World War II, many of whom operated with little recognition compared to their counterparts on carriers or battleships. From a technological perspective, Cavalla represented the culmination of lessons learned from early wartime experiences. The reliability of the Mark XIV torpedo had been restored, sonar and periscope techniques had improved, and Gato-class submarines provided the necessary range and endurance to operate across the vast Pacific theater. The attack on Shokaku validated these advancements, proving that a single, well-commanded submarine could neutralize a high-value target and escape retaliation. The combination of technology and human skill created a force multiplier effect that amplified the overall effectiveness of U.S. naval operations. The broader strategic impact of the sinking cannot be overstated. The removal of Shokaku from the battlefield directly contributed to the devastating losses suffered by the Japanese during the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. With one fewer carrier to launch aircraft, Japan's ability to contest the U.S. Navy's advance was severely diminished. This allowed American forces to establish air superiority, support amphibious landings on Saipan, and maintain momentum in the Marianas campaign. In effect, Cavalla's success helped secure the operational and strategic objectives of the U.S. Navy in the Western Pacific. Moreover, the psychological effect on both sides was profound. For the Japanese Navy, the loss of an experienced carrier and hundreds of trained personnel was a demoralizing blow. It underscored the vulnerability of even the most formidable ships to stealthy submarine attacks. Conversely, for the Americans, the success validated submarine doctrine, boosted morale, and reinforced the importance of aggressive, intelligence-led operations. Cavalla and her crew became a symbol of the unseen but decisive power of submarines, demonstrating that small, well-led teams could achieve outsized results in war. Cavalla's patrol also provided lessons for post-war naval strategy. Modern submarine operations continue to emphasize stealth, intelligence integration, precision targeting, and crew cohesion, principles that were exemplified during the Shokaku attack. The mission illustrated the effectiveness of coordinated, multi-domain warfare, where submarines, aircraft, and surface forces operate in concert to achieve strategic objectives. Lessons learned from Cavalla's success influenced submarine tactics in subsequent conflicts and remain relevant in naval doctrines today. The legacy of USS Cavalla and her crew endures not only in historical records, but also in the broader narrative of World War II. Museums, naval historians, and commemorative events honor their actions, ensuring that future generations understand the risks, ingenuity, and bravery involved. The sinking of Shokaku serves as a case study in leadership under pressure, the importance of preparation, and the decisive impact that small, disciplined units can have in large-scale operations. It reminds us that war is shaped not only by massive fleets and firepower, but also by courage, precision, and the human element beneath the waves. Cavalla herself survived the war, completing multiple successful patrols and contributing to the Allied victory in the Pacific. Her service earned her a distinguished place in naval history, and Commander Kossler's leadership was recognized with the Navy Cross. The men who served aboard her carried the experience with them long after the war, their actions forming an enduring testament to the courage and skill of American submariners. Every torpedo fired, every evasive maneuver executed, and every tense moment beneath the waves contributed to a story that remains both technically impressive and profoundly human. In conclusion, the sinking of Shokaku by USS Cavalla exemplifies the convergence of strategy, technology, and human courage. It demonstrates how a single submarine, expertly commanded and crewed, could alter the course of a battle, impact the trajectory of a campaign, and influence the outcome of a war. It remains a vivid reminder of the dangers faced by submariners, the tactical brilliance of their operations, and the immense consequences of their actions. From the silent depths beneath the Philippine Sea, Cavalla delivered a blow that resonated across the Pacific, reshaping the balance of naval power and securing her place in history. This concludes the 6-part in-depth biography and narrative of USS Cavalla's legendary engagement with the Japanese carrier Shokaku. It is a story of courage, skill, intelligence, and determination, a testament to the men who operated in silence beneath the waves and to the transformative power of submarine warfare in World War II.